H.P. Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, asks a question. What is human mind in its higher aspect? Whence comes it, if it is not a portion of the essence and, in some rare cases of incarnation, the very essence of a higher being? We learn a great deal about the human mind or the spiritual consciousness from the writings of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. In our discussion today, I will cover terms that he introduces in the Phenomenology of Spirit, specifically the first part, chapters on consciousness, self-consciousness, and reason. He introduces terms we'll look at, such as sense certainty, perception, mediation, the here and now, the dialectic, consciousness, self-consciousness, and self-actualization. We will also look at his terms being and nothing, which we find in the logic. The breath of life, proceeding from the divine and emanating in us throughout the world as a living spirit. This is what Hegel attempted to capture and portray in his philosophical system. It was also his goal, according to Daniel Cook, to teach the German language to speak philosophy in a systematic and scientific manner. And for that reason alone, it is cliché for many to say that Hegel is one of the most complicated and difficult of philosophers to read.
I wished to try to teach philosophy to speak German, not Latin, not Greek, but German, using ordinary German words, ordinary phrases. The modern translators, especially the English, this goal is not clear-cut. They have quite a time translating my work. Discussions can get quite heated. Take for an example the word aufheben. It's an ordinary word. It has a double meaning: to do away with and to preserve. English doesn't have such an equivalent term. They either say abolish or they say just say cancel. They don't have abolish, preserve. There's no word. I think sometime in 1865 they started using the word sublate, but I think they would have done better job if they had used the word suspend. You see, in suspend, you kind of have something and don't have something at the same time. It's like hovering. It's like waiting. Something's about to happen, and yet it's kind of was there. It's kind of like being. I wanted to use a word that could say that being had a presence and an absence. It was a dissolving and a coming. It's there, not there, but aufheben. A better word. The English should use that word. They would get the job done.
Indeed, his work is a hermeneutic challenge, but not because of the terms, but rather because it is a demanding examination into the reflective self. It's an exposition that demands a different type of mirroring, an inward mirroring. It's a viewing of the mechanism, the very activity of philosophical thinking at its higher cognitive levels. As thinking beings, Hegel considers humans as born metaphysicians. The pursuit is extraordinarily unique and still unmatched and revolutionary. Hegel aims to document the journey of spirit as it comes to know itself as spirit, as it knows itself as being, which is all reality, and consequently understands otherness as its own. Hegel positions the dialectic as the law which unveils Geist, that is the spirit or mind, as the unfolding of the absolute. And this is a systematic enterprise which Hegel considers the very subject of philosophical science. His most well-known work is translated as either the Phenomenology of Spirit or Mind. It documents the evolutionary path of absolute spirit. His work has positioned itself as one of the most influential texts in the history of modern philosophy. It was first published with the title System of Science, first part, and other copies had the title Science of the Experience of Consciousness or the Science of the Phenomenology of Spirit. The preface, which was written last, appears first. The goal is spirit's insight into what knowing is. The philosopher Joseph Frey states clearly that Hegel aims to display the becoming of science in general, a becoming which is a journey from immediate spirit or sensible common sense knowledge to authentic knowledge or philosophical science. Delaney and Wallenstein call the Phenomenology one of the most ambitious, dense, and enigmatic works in the history of philosophy, a work still awaiting adequate deciphering. Like gigantic and enigmatic pyramids, as Nietzsche once noted, Hegel's Phenomenology points to a task still before us, to unravel the movement of thought itself, to create our expanded concept of reason, its own temporal becoming, its own development, to chart and recognize the movement of spirit, the movement of consciousness. Let me share with you Hegel's writing style, just to show you the complexity. We will not go into an analysis or interpretation. This comes from a section on perception. A thing, or one, that exists on its own account, insofar as it does not stand in this relationship to others, for this relation establishes rather its continuity with others, and for it to be connected with others is to cease to exist on its own account. It is just through the absolute character of the thing and its opposition that it relates itself to others, and is essentially only this relating. This relation, however, is the negation of its self-subsistence, and it is really the essential property of the thing that is its undoing, the conceptual necessity of the experience through which consciousness discovers that the thing is demolished by the very determinateness that constitutes its essence and its being for itself, can be summarized as follows. The thing is posited as being for itself, or as the absolute negation of all otherness, therefore, as purely self-related negation. But the negation that is self-related is the suspension of itself. In other words, the thing has its essential being in another thing. Terry Pinkard, in his recent translation, credits Hegel with formulating what came to be called subjectivity, citing the Phenomenology as instrumental in the formation of existentialism, Marxism, pragmatism. I go further, citing it and the science of logic as sacred works, both comprising the backbone, the structure of our mystical thinking, and the foundation which gave rise to the positive thinking revolution. The Phenomenology was a work that was intended to be a part of a larger philosophical system which included his logic. The logic, it opens with an examination of being and nothingness, and proceeds to address, of course, other logical distinctions such as infinity and negation. The logic is delineated into the objective and subjective. The unity of being, our notion of nothingness, our notion of becoming, are ushered into view out of their hiddenness. Determinate being is discovered, and as difference and indifference, the thing in itself and the thing for itself is found subject to laws operating within the world of appearance. The immediacy of our sense certainty, that is the information we derive from sense data, which seems to give us all the information about the world, is found to be the emptiest. It is empty unless we mediate through another. The colors, such as the blues, the greens, the shapes, the reds, the heights, the texture, the light, all are understood through the mediation of otherness. And there are an infinite number of quantities, qualities, and quantities before us. Logic organizes sense data or perceptual data into our forms of thought. Now, by forms of thought, I am not referring here to thought forms as understood by Alice Bailey or Annie Besant, but rather the forms of thought which are prior to and act and form the very building blocks of thought forms and precipitation. For example, when viewing the images at the bottom of this display, we are unraveling myriads of data, assembling and assorting the sensory world into clarity and meaning. Imagine, just for a moment, what life is like for a newborn baby. Sense data is not at first understood. Everything is blurred. It is not only the eyes trying to focus, but so is the understanding. Everything is being categorized. Black is not a color. White is not a color. The baby does not know what color is. Sounds are not words. Language and thought have not developed. Imagining this baby state gets us closer to what Hegel has posited as the perennial starting point of experience, the immediacy and emptiness of sense data, the immediacy and emptiness of our encounter with pure being and nothing. Pure being immediately confronts us. The French philosopher Jean Hippolyte has beautifully described the phenomenology as philosophical consciousness moving against the ineffable. In the logic, Hegel describes pure being as having no determination, indeterminate immediacy. It is equal only to itself. It is not unequal relative to another. It has no diversity within itself, nor reference outwards. It's pure emptiness, and there is nothing to be intuited in it. Hegel describes nothingness as equality with itself. It's a complete emptiness. It's absent of all determination and content. There is no differentiation in itself. It's completely undifferentiated. To intuit or to think nothing has a meaning. Consequently, nothing exists in our intuiting or thinking. It is an empty intuition, however, and it's an empty thought in itself. Nothing is therefore the same determination or absence of determination as pure being. Pure being, indeterminate immediacy, precedes determinate being. Determinate being is self-determining, immanently self-determining, and is determined against another. Determinations, such as qualities, quantities, magnitude, relation, all are alterable and finite. Their determinate oneness is also immediate and prior to mediation, negation, becoming, and non-being. Nevertheless, they are all resolved into infinity, free from opposition. They are freed through the becoming, and becoming is the oneness of being and nothing. Tapandari ke uthenmeni. Everything flows. Nothing remains.
Now, as you know, Parmenides, he was the first. He was the first to talk about pure being as the absolute and sole truth. Only being is, he said, only being, and nothing, absolutely, is not. Yeah, of course, the Buddhists, they had a doctrine. They put up the void, and the void was a nothing, and it was their principle. But Heraclitus, he recognized this as a one-sided abstraction, and he took thinking higher to the concept of becoming. Being is, nothing is, all flows. So, you see, we have it, pure being and nothing are the same. But what is the truth is neither being nor nothing, but that being passes over into nothing, and nothing, it passes over into being. You see, each are equally true. None are true. They are not distinguished from each other, and yet they are not the same. They are absolutely distinct and inseparable. The truth is the movement of the immediate vanishing of the one into the other, a movement in which they are distinguished by a difference that has equally and immediately resolved itself.
Can you see it? Look for it. In this photo, there's a mountain lion. He's walking along the rocky terrain. This looking is a sorting, it's a categorizing of perceptual data. And this looking, this thinking, this analyzing, this conceptualization is the very subject matter of the Hegelian system. Here it is. Did you find it? This is the path of knowing as it moves beyond the immediacy of the senses. The senses alone do not provide us with what is, and what is only grasped by the mediation. Spirit utilizes mediation to process the information through its encounter with otherness or perceived otherness. Sense certainty is perennial. It is immediate at the start and provides only the knowledge that something is. This image, for example, we perceive it from or with the sense of seeing. But this seeing only informs us of something's existence. It doesn't tell us that these are dots. It doesn't tell us that this is an optical illusion, that the dots are the same color, or that their shape is round set against a square against a black background. We discover in Hegel's Dialectic that while sense certainty appears to be the richest and truest kind of knowledge, it is the poorest. Poorest because it only points to existence. It does not tell us what the existence is. Consciousness does emerge, and it has a relationship to that which is pointed out. It stands as a pure I in relationship to a pure this. Pure because both are empty of content. Remember, the I does not know at this stage what The this is, hence the pure I and the pure this emerge. Mediation processes the information by and through the apprehension of otherness. It is a sorting out of the different colors, the different shapes and sizes. The apprehension is a movement, a dialectical movement. It is the movement of spirit in coming to know that there is something beyond the senses. Whether or not Hegel's system begins with sense certainty and deception, deception because remember, sense certainty is knowledge of the immediate. It knows that something is, but it does not know what that something is. All that it says about what it knows is just that it is. Its truth contains nothing but the sheer being of the thing. Or whether his system begins with pure being, which, if you recall, is negated. What we do see is from either the emergence of his dialectical process. While it may not be immediately apparent, dialectics is a lawful constant. These examples of optical illusions demonstrate how our perceptual process sublates the senses. Perception overtakes sense certainty, but perception, like sense certainty, is also deceptive, and the dialectical movement of spirit proceeds to the understanding of universals. Immediacy and mediation arise from sense certainty. Pure being is the essence of sense certainty. Consciousness is in this certainty a pure I, or I am in it as a pure this. I, this particular I, am aware of this particular thing. This arises, this thing, the object, in a twofold shape, in the here and now. In the here and now, we discover negation and abstraction. We find that universals preserve the particular.
If you ask me what is now, and we answer that now is night, I say let's test it. Let's write it down. A truth does not lose anything by being written, any more than it can through our preserving it. If now, this afternoon, we look, again this written truth has become stale. The now that is night, however, is preserved. It is treated as what it professes to be, as something that is, but it proves itself to be, on the contrary. It's something that is not. The now does indeed preserve itself, but as something that is not night. It is not night. Equally, it preserves itself in the face of the day that is now, is as something that is also not day. In other words, it's a negative in general, and it's self-preserving. This is a self-preserving now that is not immediate, but mediated, for it is determined as a permanent and self-preserving now, through the fact that something else is vis-a-vis day and night is not.
Hegel's dialectic reflects the continuous movement of spirit as a living sphere determining itself through unending moments, each moment replacing the previous, overcoming its initial grasp and developing itself further. The essence is infinity, restless infinity, the wheel of Fortuna. It supersedes all distinctions. In the becoming, time and space provide stability. The simple essence of time, in its equality with itself, has the same stable shape of space. Differences are present as differences, but they are preserved in the universal medium. The constant movement or universal flux, it dissolves what at the same time endures. You see, it cannot supersede the different moments if they do not have an enduring existence. The dialectic reveals that which was once true is no longer. It is a truth that has been superseded. The first truth has been set aside. The now is no longer a now, but has become a has-been. So too the here, pointed out, is similarly a this, which in fact is not this here. There is a plurality of heres, and the here which was vanishes into the other heres. The dialectic of sense certainty is this historical movement of conscious experience. It is always a forgetting and starting. What consciousness learns is the universal. We see Hegel's understanding of philosophical history as a movement of philosophical consciousness, drawing on the genius of Descartes' ergo cogito, the I think and the I this, and Plato for the universals. The wealth of sense knowledge now belongs to perception, not immediate sense certainty. There's a new relation with the object. The object that has emerged, we now have a positive universal. Still, the universal is a unity of difference and negation. Negation is inherent and determines its thinghood. In Gilles Deleuze's work on difference and repetition, he clarifies Hegel, writing that while difference is drawn from the instance contracted within the living present, what matters more than the distinction between the oppositional elements is the distinction between the levels on which both operate. The differences between two repetitions, the material and the spiritual, for example, have vast distances, saying the spiritual is a repetition of the whole on diverse coexisting levels. The whole includes difference. Repetition changes nothing in the object repeated, but does change, or better said, it modifies something in the mind which contemplates it. Hegel discusses this modification, calling it common sense, for it is what emerges from the dialectic of sense certainty versus perception. And common sense, as you can imagine, is very naive. Hence, it will be later replaced by spirit with a still more greater certainty.
The one is a moment of negation, a reflection of self to self, excluding the other. As the one, however, determinateness is set free from this unity with its opposite, and it exists in and for itself. In these moments taken together, the thing, as the truth of perception, is completed. Common sense offers at its very best only a rhetoric of trivial truths, and if asked for the significance of these truths, it assures us it resides in the heart and in the heart of others. Ah, pooh! The object must be defined more precisely. The sound common sense, which takes itself to be solid in this perceptual process, is only the poorest. Of course, it fancies itself to be the richest, as did sense certainty.
The dialectic is always operative, a continual movement of antithesis and resolution. Our senses, our sense certainty is sublated by our perceptions. Our perceptions are sublated by our understanding. Common sense is topsy-turvy, spun by a whirlwind of one-sided abstractions. It's devoured by its own deception. Seeing and hearing are overtaken by consciousness. Consciousness is now thought. The notion of the true emerges and is held in the understanding, not in the heart. This dialectic yields forth the notion of the true, and its content and its antithesis are enveloped in a unity of being, being for self and being for another. You see, the object has in a way returned to itself. It's freed. It flies away, so to speak. Night is night and day is day. The relationship that remains and is preserved is apprehension. The true object is now the universal, an unconditioned universal. That is, a universal no longer dependent on sense certainty, and yet it remains. It is preserved as an object for consciousness. Consciousness also returns to itself. It is now conditioned. It is a conditioned being, having before it the unconditioned universal. In these early stages, consciousness does not recognize itself in the reflected object as the notion. It does not recognize itself in the night. Night is a notion, for an example, but consciousness is not recognizing this. There is a dualism. The object is different from consciousness, but it is held together and preserved by force. Force holds everything together, all of the movements and all of the moments. The object has developed through the movement in such a way that consciousness is involved in that development. But consciousness has only the objective essence, while the understanding has the notion. Terms such as being in itself, being for itself, and being for another are repeated throughout the Phenomenology and Hegel's works. Each refers to determinate being, that is, to the object, to the thing as it is perceived. The apple's identity is a being for itself, as well as a being in itself. The man is likewise has a similar identity. It is being for itself and being in itself. What is equally true is that each is being for another. There is a reciprocity of being in being for being. What Geist, that is the spirit or mind, discerns in these various movements and moments is that the notion is also an object. Goodness is a notion, for an example. Hence, the man is collecting all of the apples. He knows the apples are good. He's collecting the apples from his neighbor's tree to sell them as goods in the marketplace back to his neighbor. I'm kidding, of course. This man would not take the neighbor's apples to sell them back to the neighbor, or at least that is my notion.
As you know, I can get quite wordy. Yes. But pay attention now, because this is important. In all previous modes of consciousness, what is true for consciousness is something other than itself. The notion of this truth, it vanishes in the experiencing of it. What the object immediately was in itself, the being, you remember, of sense certainty, the concrete thing you saw in sense perception, the understanding, even the force, all of that proves to be not at all. The notion of the object that we have is superseded in the actual object. The first impression we have is superseded in experience. Certainty gives place to truth, but now there arises what did not emerge in this previous relationship. There is now a certainty identical with its truth, and this certainty is its own object, and consciousness is to itself the truth. There is indeed an otherness, yes. Consciousness makes a distinction, but if we give the name of notion to the movement of knowing, and the name of object to knowing, and as the passive unity, which of course you know is the I, the I is then not only for us, but for knowing itself. The object, it corresponds to the notion. It is clear, very clear, that being in itself and being for another is the same. You see, the I is the content of the connection. The I is the connecting itself. The I is its own self. Yes, of course. And at the same time, it overarches the other, which for the I is equally only the I itself.
The I am I, which is preserved, is a unity that appears as a dualism. The self-consciousness, which is for another, is its other self. The philosopher Edith Stein, a student of Husserl, she says this about the acknowledgement of self-consciousness. We are most strongly seized inwardly. The give and take is most intense when the being that we encounter is another person. Here, approval and disapproval take the form of love and hate. Consciousness becomes aware of this otherness as something alive, something living.
Herr Professor, this is outrageous. I must...
Madam Goethe, close that door immediately!
Here in this example, self-consciousness is acknowledged when confronted by another self-consciousness. Madame Goethe is immediately entering into Hegel's room.
This is my bedroom, Madam Goethe, my study. I've turned on the light. All should be well. Tell me, how can I help you?
In this example, self-consciousness is a movement, and what Hegel or spirit is distinguishing from itself is itself as itself. The difference, as otherness, is overcome. The I am I remains motionless, but the difference is only a movement, an abstract moment of beholding oneself in another. In this case, Hegel beholds himself in Madame Goethe. The determinate shape of being remains. It remains sensuous and free, but the identity of itself with itself becomes explicit. What's true here is the unity of self-consciousness or spirit with itself.
Herr Hegel, this is not true. My husband is not stealing apples and selling them to my neighbor. That woman lies. She does not speak the truth. My neighbor gave that tree to my husband.
What? There's no need to call me a liar.
Madam Goethe, please, calm down. Let me have an apple.
In life, one's self-consciousness meets another, and this meeting is the most disturbing fact of his existence. There is a point of view on the universe other than my own, and this other point of view is just as valid as my own.
Yes, it is true. He sells the goods in the marketplace, but he's splitting the profits with our elderly neighbor, who can no longer harvest the fruit. And that tree is now producing more fruit than ever. And that is why my husband is dancing so freely and feeling so alive, because he's helping our neighbor.
I'm so sorry. Let me interrupt. Madame Goethe, I meant no harm. I apologize for speaking falsely. I thought I knew what was true, but I see that I have erred. But I'm so happy that you spoke, because it helps me to demonstrate what happens to self-consciousness at this stage and to explain the very next movement. Consciousness now sees itself as its own immediate truth, but the dialectic is revealing that anything immediate is not true. That's why I made this mistake. Although self-consciousness loses its certainty, the I is preserved. The I remains a unity throughout all of the movements. It remains as the I am I, a motionless tautology. This unity of self-consciousness with itself becomes essential. Through this antithesis, self-consciousness learns that the object is independent, that it's dynamic, it's a living thing. Life is discerned. You see, the notion is now splitting into two again: self-consciousness and life. Remember, self-consciousness is an infinite unity of differences, and the object is this unity. The object is no longer for itself. It is now implicit. It's an inward object for consciousness. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in his commentary, states that it's this inner complexity which makes possible this double relation of self-other. And in order to be a conscious being, the subject must be embodied in life. In order to realize the perfection of consciousness, it must fight and overcome limits. Consequently, the subject is this very sphere of conflict and contradiction. This movement may remind you of the dance of Shiva, where distinct individuality negates itself, and it also negates its separation, restoring its unity. Being is no longer abstract. It is this living movement. The independent members, Madame Goethe and Hegel, though they are being for self, they are an infinite unity divided within itself. Life is a splitting up of these shapes, a whole which dissolves its development, and it is this movement that is preserved. You may by now be asking, can't mediated knowledge also be incorrect? And the answer, of course, is yes. As you can imagine, this can get rather complex. You can have mediated immediacies, mediated mediacy. For an example, Hegel takes issue with Cartesian metaphysics. In his encyclopedia, Hegel claims that Descartes began with syllogisms that were quite naive, saying his propositions developed from unproven mediation. For an example, the idea of God's existence just from having the notion of God, and that this science proceeded to develop what we know as modern-day science.
The last thing philosophy wants to do is to contradict Descartes, his propositions of immediate knowing. But believe me, his metaphysics is quite naive and proceeds from unproven presuppositions. It's not surprising that philosophy likes to congratulate itself, pat itself on the back for holding dear all of its old propositions. It expresses the entire universal content, which have become the general prejudices of the times. It does so in quite an unphilosophical way. To be sure, philosophy can lose its way. Are you surprised? Let me tell you, it's hard to find anyone that thinks that Descartes' propositions are opposed to philosophy, namely, the proposition that what is true is immanent, present for the spirit, that God's being is immediately and inseparably linked with the thoughts we have about God, that the objective world is inseparable from our subjectivity, or that there is an objective world. You know, this immediate knowing goes so far in its abstraction that the determination of existence is inseparably linked not only with the thought of God, but just as much with our intuition and with the representation of my body and of all external things. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It stands at the very center of the entire concern of modern philosophy and science, but this affirmation, it was uttered in the mode of immediacy. Descartes' unmediated syllogisms designates nothing but a connection of distinct determinations which, as you know by now, is mediated by nothing. Mediate knowing, taken in isolation, is also inadequate for the cognition of truth. The important issue is that logical thinking of the antithesis of immediacy and mediation. This is what must find its own place within the science itself.
Phenomenology aims to describe the movement of knowing. Through experience, the abstract object or the abstraction will enrich the eye and undergo further unfolding. In this movement, consciousness unfolds, and at one moment it sees itself as essential, and at another moment inessential, and so too the experience of otherness. At times the other is essential, and sometimes it's inessential. Hegel calls this reoccurring chameleon shifting as the dialectic of lordship and bondage. This bondage is also known as master-slave. Keep in mind, in the domain of life, the self exists in a twofold shape. The I is recognized by the other as the I recognizes the other. Self-consciousness is split to its very depths. It can be anguishing, for it stands juxtaposed, not only to itself, but to its experiencing. The juxtapositioning involves what is called by Hegel the unhappy consciousness, and it is this master-slave relationship. There is a movement of dominance always occurring between these two juxtapositions. Here, for an example, the artwork of Michelangelo is examples, the commentary by Jean Hippolyte. He writes that the unhappy consciousness appears in Hegel as the master-slave God-man. Man does not exist without God, and God does not exist without man. This unity does not absorb them. They remain opposed, and it's the unhappy consciousness as a continual transition of unity within the duality, between the mutable and the changeable, between essence and non-essence, and is, of course, the prelude to spirit's recognition and self-actualization. This duality, the living, the independent otherness of Dasein, of self-consciousness, it's a splitting. Itself from itself is a battleground. It's a battleground of oppositionality. The master-slave dialectic addresses this very struggle of life and death, of what is essential for it and what is inessential, and the interdependency of these independent shapes. Each independent shape of consciousness recognizes the other, and it's involved in a struggle of inequality and extremes. Each is for the other, and it's engaged in a struggle for a fight of self-certainty, the certainty of itself. This fight renders a kind of personhood, of individuality. The Lord is the consciousness that exists for itself. The Lord, or Master, is, however, bound up with an existence that is a thing, a kind of independent thinghood to which it is chained. You may be asking how another self-consciousness can be viewed as a thing, and you are wise to do so. But remember, this thinghood has a variety of shapes, and consciousness is a remembering and a forgetting and a resolution and a revolving of itself. Today, as you know, many discussions resulted. Such, for an example, existentialism was born, and today we now have our current day topics on the rediscovery of the person, our personhood. Also, remember to keep in mind, in this slave-master dialectic, this is a depiction of the movement of consciousness only, which, of course, as many have argued, may have been inspired to Hegel by the Haitian Revolution that took place began in 1791, ran through 1803. And that revolution, as you know, had a profound effect on the Western ideologies. In the master-slave dialectic, the slave becomes essential, rising to the status of the master, and the master becomes the slave. This is a conflict for consciousness. It's a life and death struggle. It's a battle for recognition and the desire to achieve its aims, to move out of being an unhappy consciousness. And this is where the magic of Hegel's phenomenology, or rather the wisdom of spirit in coming to know itself as all reality, as the all that is, begins to emerge. At first, it merely divines its presence in the world, but proceeds thereupon to take possession of its inheritance, to plant the ensign of its sovereignty on every height and depth. There must be no differentiation of the real in which it does not discover itself, and its idea of itself must develop as it proceeds in such discovery. Observation is concerned with nature and with spirit and their relation. These three must be studied in turn. The relationship to the object is recognition and desire, and we discover that self-consciousness achieves satisfaction only in another self-consciousness. A good example of this is the experience of lovers. Self-consciousness has now determined itself as essential being, and it aims to give itself an actual existence, to enjoy itself as a particular individual in the experience. Essential being is the negativity of the other. The other is, but self-consciousness, in contrast, is now the positive element, and it splits again into a given actuality and the end, which it realizes by superseding that given actuality. It makes a new end, replacing what was given. Self-consciousness becomes immediate, abstract, being for self. In other words, seeing itself as this particular individual in another, or seeing self-consciousness as itself. This experience of what the truth of the end is, it raises self-consciousness to a higher level, and from now on it is itself, its own end. The end is a universal. Remember, individuality cannot be preserved. It cannot endure. What emerges now is the law of the heart. It emerges as a good. It's both the action and it's the end. And it's achieved through the annihilation of the individual. Self-consciousness rises to the level of virtue. Virtue aims towards the good. What it learns through virtue is that the end is already attained in principle. The hypothesis, for an example, in scientific methodology has the end imagined at the outset of its inquiry. The thing is now spirit's being for self. Self-consciousness now knows itself to be all reality in the form of an individuality that directly expresses its own self and consequently no longer encounters resistance from an actual world opposed to it. The aim and object are the expressing of itself. The one becomes the universal. The moment is pleasure. The transition is a leap. Its essence is its antithesis, and all of the moments are contained within consciousness. This is the riddle of experience. It is the demolition of its individuality. This is a new form of consciousness. Its shape has a new shape. Self-consciousness aims to become self-consciousness in another self-consciousness, to reduce the other to itself. As mentioned earlier, love is a very good example of this unfolding, where the lover seeks unification in the beloved. But keep in mind, this unification and striving is not isolated to lovers, but incorporates every aim and desired goal. This is often the reason why Hegelian philosophy is considered a domination theory. Self-consciousness conceives itself as this specific essence existing for itself. The goal is the transcendence of that goal, becoming an object, not as a specific self-consciousness, but as a unity with itself and the other. In The Secret Doctrine, H.P. Blavatsky writes that the gods of light proceed from the gods of darkness, that where there is no struggle, there is no merit. And she tells us that absolute light and darkness are the same, that there is in truth neither, that to separate them they both die. Yet each have a role. This is the Hegelian dialectic. One builds external forms, the other the essence, which later becomes the higher human self. Blavatsky's Phenomenology proceeds to suggest that the distinction is illusory, each generated and created out of the other in order to come into being. The waters falling on the soil, the breathed of essence taking its abode in man, living fire was needed. That fire which gives the human mind its self-perception and self-consciousness.
Here we are. Consciousness now despises all of the supreme gifts it has, our intellect, our science. It aims now to destroy objective being. It wants its happiness, and it gives itself to the devil. Faustus was right, and hence it must perish. Self-consciousness aims at the enjoyment of pleasure, knowing what appears as a duality is not a fact. It knows the other to be its own selfhood. It attains its end only to learn the truth. That truth is the realization of this unity, and itself as the actualized object. This is the actualization of consciousness, when consciousness becomes the object of itself, when it understands the thing to be like itself, when it is aware of itself that it is the objectively real world.
Self-actualization is only the beginning of spirit's recognition of itself as a spirit. I suggest that this stage is also the starting point where spirit can proceed to work on the ideas presented by Alice Bailey, specifically regarding thought forms and precipitations, wherein she writes, "As the waters bathe the form created, they are absorbed and used. The form increases in its strength. Let the magician thus continue until the work suffices. Let the outer builders cease their labors then, and let the inner workers enter onto their cycle. The focus now is on the right use of energy. In the process of thought form building, the time came when the form had to be oriented in the right direction and set upon the proper path in order to carry out its Creator's will and purpose. And this is our aim and goal as Theosophists.